Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by Spartan Forge. On today's episode, I am joined by a friend of mine, Tony Peterson, over at Meat Eater. So Tony has proven himself over the years at being able to shoot deer all over the country on both public and private lands. So we discuss working your way up to bucks, why does are smarter than bucks, shooting whatever makes you happy, manageable goals, late season food sources on public land, late season setups, and much more. On this week's Mountain Buck Monday Story of the Week, we have a story coming out of Pennsylvania from Chris Strickler. Chris wrote in, I have been following you for a year or two now and decided to change the way I hunt based on a lot of the information that you provide. I killed this mountain buck 8-point last year in the Pennsylvania mountains. I was hunting a small strip of mature timber between two cutouts where the bucks cruised back and forth from one cut to the other, looking for does. After having several does and smaller bucks pass through, I grunted this guy close enough 20 minutes later for a shot at just 15 yards on the ground when he swung by to check the mock scrape I had out upwind of my location. Thanks again for opening my eyes to a different area on the map and breaking away from my norm. So congrats, Chris. Just a stud old looking deer. You can definitely check that out over at East Meets West Hunt on Instagram or East Meets West Outdoors on Facebook. Some really cool buck. Big, gnarly looking, what you think of as a mature Pennsylvania mountain buck. So congratulations on that. And it's hard to beat those spots where you get that strip of timber between two different logging cuts. So great work on that. If you have your own story you want to send it in, send it to Beau at eastmeetswesthunt.com or just head over to eastmeetswesthunt.com and fill in the contact us form, and I'll get it that way as well. Other than that, I just want to remind everybody, sign up for the email newsletter. You'll be getting information here very shortly on the Mountain Buck Scouting Camp for 2023. That'll be the weekend of April 15th and 16th there. So I got that locked in. Just working out the rest of the details. As I've been saying, you can go over to YouTube and check out my YouTube channel, which is under my name, Beau Martonik. You can see a little highlight video of last year's camp, see kind of what it entails there. I'm excited, but the email newsletter is where you're going to find out first. So make sure you're signed up for that newsletter. When you get on my website, there'll be a pop-up that comes up. Do you want to sign up for updates? Just put your email in there and you'll be on the list. So once you do that, you'll be the first to know when registration opens for the scouting camp. Should be a good time. So I'm very excited about that. And again, thank you guys for all the support and all the interest in doing that camp. I'm looking forward to that more than just about anything coming in the next year. So really excited. But until then, I hope everyone had a great Christmas, and late season's open here in Pennsylvania. So for the next 3 weeks or so, here and there, when I get a chance to go out hunting, I'm going to try to target hunting some does. And that's what we talk about a lot in this podcast with Tony Peterson and myself. So Tony is, I love his mentality on all of this stuff. Tony has earned his way into being a big buck killer. He kills whatever makes him happy wherever he goes. Sometimes it's not always the biggest buck. Sometimes it is. And he does what he wants. And I think I have a lot of respect for him for that. And also come down to killing does. And it's not as easy as everyone claims to be, especially public land, big woods in the late season. So with that being said, thanks everyone for listening. If you want to share the podcast with your friends, give it a rating and review. That helps out so much, helps keep this going and reach new people. So have a great rest of your week. All right, I think we have Zoom figured out here, Tony. So welcome to the show.
I think we got her, buddy. I had to do about 17 updates and restart her, but we're here now.
You would think that, a couple guys that do podcasts pretty often, we'd be able to figure out the technical side of it. But I feel like either myself or the guests run into this on just about every show. And a lot of times it comes back on me. So this time, at least it was you. So
Yeah, no, it was. I'm glad I could make you feel better.
yeah, it is funny though. Like I have, again, I think this will be episode 280 of mine. And it seems like I learned something new about whether it's the recording software or what's going on with all of it at any time. And I had been recording all of my podcasts on one of those little Zoom H6Ns, like the portable ones. I've done all my podcasts on those until recently. I got a fancier like board that I have over here and have it all set up. So that was kind of a learning curve for me to figuring out what all these buttons do and everything else. But it's really nice being able to Bluetooth connect to my computer now. And I had things rigged. Like I'm not an audio guy that before, but I think I got it figured out. Do you record yours just from your house, like when you do like the foundation stuff for Wired to Hunt and in all your past podcasts that you've done?
I use an H6 for anything, if you're on the road, hunting camp or whatever, and then I use it for the foundations, but I actually record through a program on my computer for, these Skype and Zoom interviews if I have a guest. But you're right. I mean, it's like, this is a dumb thing to bitch about, but it sucks when you're like on your own because you have there's nobody in IT Beau Martonik can call. You're like,
No.
I just got to Google this shit and figure it out. And it is always different, and there's always updates, and it can be a little bit of a pain, but it's worth it.
Well, it's funny. The first time that I had, well, not the first time, but when I first started doing video recordings on Zoom, I've had the free version of Zoom. Okay, I'm cheap. I'm gonna try to get away with the lowest I can. And I was doing a video podcast with someone, and partway through, apparently there was like a 45-minute limit on me doing the video recordings, or maybe it was 60 minutes, whatever it was, and it cut out. And I was like, right then and there, I was like, whatever it costs, boom, credit card in. I'm get it out of the way. And that's sometimes how my learning process has worked through trying to figure out doing these things. Is a lot of trial by fire, I guess.
Dude, all these companies are like drug dealers, man. They just give you a little taste,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're like, "You want the real thing? You got to pony up."
Yeah, and it's like all of them have like the free services that do pretty good, and then as you start doing some other stuff, you have to add to it. Next thing you know, I look at my monthly bills, and it's like, man, these $10, $12, $15 a month things all add up as you start going through them all. It's kind of like how Netflix and Spotify and all those platforms get you on the personal level too.
Yeah, just recurring payment services thing it's big money, man.
Oh, it's smart, that's for sure. We're deer hunters. We're not tech guys, so that they use that to their advantage. But anyways, so Tony Peterson, welcome back to the podcast. You've been on here plenty of times. I don't know.
It's been a while, man.
It has
I've been waiting for you to call. I'm like, come on, Beau.
No, I think this might. I don't know if this is the first time since you're full on with Meat Eater now, or if you were. I can't remember the last time that we did an episode together. It seemed like it was just recently, but again, I just did another podcast this morning with somebody, and I was like, yeah, we just did one like a year ago, and I looked, and it was literally 3 years ago. So time kind of flies when we're doing these sort of things. So anyways, Tony Peterson, for anyone that doesn't know, I'll give you my first hand impression of Tony. So Tony is one of those guys that I look up to from the standpoint, if it's public land, private land, big bucks, small bucks, does, Tony doesn't judge. He's going across the board, whatever he's heading after. He has a lot of experience in, and I love reading any of his stuff, whether it's through the Wired to Hunt, through Meat Eater, through the podcasts. And you've been around for a little while. I'm not saying you're old, Tony. I'm just saying you've been around for a little while.
Man, I'll tell you what, I'm starting to feel old in this game. Like everybody's younger, and I'm just like, it's actually kind of cool for me because, I don't know. I started really chasing the public land thing, I think in like 2008, 2009. And, I did it hard for like 10 years, 12 years. And, I'm kind of at a point now where my kids are hunting and my priorities are changing a little bit. And so I still love like the figuring out the public land thing. Like that's still just way up there on the list for me. but I don't want to work as hard as I used to. So I'm kind of like picking places I really want to hunt and not, not basing it around whether I think I can go kill a Pope and young buck here or there, but just like I want to hunt the big woods in Wisconsin. Like I want to go to certain places in South Dakota or North Dakota or wherever and just like be there. And it's just like a different thing. And I watch these younger guys like you coming up and like getting after it so hard and scouting so hard. I'm like, I remember those days. Like, I don't really want to go back. I'm pretty comfortable now, but I still, I have those moments where I get out there on some new chunk of public land somewhere, and I'm just like, oh, that old feeling comes back. Like, yes, like you get to figure it out and just like day to day through like tent camping and everything. And it's still such a driver, but it's a different thing for me now.
It's funny. I talk about it. My cousin was over my house over the weekend. I was boiling my deer skull from Pennsylvania, and which anybody that's ever done that, done their own European mounts, like I used to do them all a long time ago back in high school and college, and I kind of forgot why I stopped doing it and paying someone to do it. And I was like, I'm going to do my own again this year. And then I was like, all right, I remembered why I'd paid somebody, because it's a kind of a disgusting long process of doing it. But nonetheless, we were sitting around. I use it whenever we have there's things like that going on. I use it as an occasion. Me and Mason, we call it kind of a guys thing. Like, you find a reason for the guys to get together, have a couple beers and hang out. And that's kind of what we did. And we were talking, and as we've been traveling all these different states and doing all this, it's like, man, I'd really like to have like some easier hunts built into it, or just like a place that I could go to, not really even easier, but like a place I can go back to all the time, whether it's a chunk of private land or property. And I don't mean easier. I just mean something that you go back to all the time, and that can break up the monotony of trying to figure out a new place constantly, because it does wear on you for a while, as as you've done it for a long time now.
Yeah, and a part of it is like it's like the mental side of things, right? Like when you have a private place, I have these two little properties I own over in northern Wisconsin, and that's where my girls shoot all their deer. And it's so simple, right? Like I put up some blinds in the preseason, and it's like kind of set up. And I love just being like, there's some deer that have been showing up on camera. Let's go sit there because the wind's right, or not. And not just being like, okay, what do I need? Am I going in to saddle up? Am I going to go sit on the ground? Where's the fresh sign? What did I see last night? What do I think they're going to be doing? And it's just like a mental vacation sometimes to just go hunt someplace. You don't have to think about that stuff as much. And again, like that's like a dumb thing to bitch about, but it is like just nice to just go out and be like, no pressure. I'm going to do, a little backpack, carry some stuff in, and you're not just, because that's one of the things that, when you travel a lot and you do a lot of the public land thing, and maybe you mix in some Western stuff, it's like, gosh, you're always like, okay, what do I need for this trip? What am I forgetting? Did I get my oil change? Do I have like this packed? Do I have my butcher kit ready to go? And sometimes it's nice to dumb this stuff down and just like take an easy one.
Yeah, and just hunt and just spend time in the tree and so last week I was actually on the Wired to Hunt podcast talking to you, and that really got us. We were talking about late season hunting and everything, and I was like, man, like I still have a buck tag in West Virginia, and I believe like if you want something bad enough, you really got to put in the effort to go do it. And there's the other frame of mind too of like, okay, sometimes you got to understand once you're just kind of a little bit mentally wore out and through it, and you're like, all right, I kind of want to just have some fun. And not that that's not fun, but there's the aspect of, I just kind of want to spend this late season, after Christmas is in Pennsylvania here, our flintlock and late archery opens up, of just like doe hunting. I have 2 doe tags in my pocket, and I'm like, I want to just hunt does. And I was thinking about it. It's like, man, I haven't really just like specifically targeted does in a long time. And I feel like that's a hole in my game. 'Cause like, that's definitely a hole in my game. Like it's not easy to do that. It sounds easy. And throughout like an entire season, you can have opportunities at does, but if you're specifically targeting them, it's not as simple as everyone thinks. And I was listening to you talking on the Foundation's podcast, The Wired to Hunt, about does, and you're like, you go up to anybody and ask them as far as like, oh, have you, could you go out and kill a doe? Like, yeah, I kill doe anytime. It's like, okay, well, when's the last time you did it, and how did that happen? And it's like,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
it's I don't know, it's fun.
it is, and we have so much focus on bucks and big bucks, and I get it, but I'm still kind of like old school as far as I kind of appreciate the process of working your way up to big bucks. It used to be like you squirrel hunted with your dad and rabbit hunted, and when you got into the deer camp or whatever, it was like you're going to shoot whatever comes by for a while, and then you might work your way up to letting some go. And we kind of present this image now that you can skip all those steps because we know how to hack nature, right? Like if you have the right situation, you can make big bucks be there, like. And so we kind of sell that image, but I'm like, most people don't have that, and you're not gonna become good at this stuff if you just skip the line that way, because you're gonna have to have an easy spot to hunt to kill big bucks if you don't know what you're doing. Like you just I don't know a way around that. And you know how it is. Like there's so many situations where, yeah, you might have that private place where the does come out to the bean field every night and you could shoot them. Okay, great. Could you go into the big woods on public land in the late season and kill a mature doe? Like, or could you go to the public land down your road in September, or and make this happen? And it's not so easy. And I think it's like fundamentally a part of getting good. Like you're not just hunting one specific deer. You're like learning how to hunt concentrations of deer and get drawn on some of the craftiest deer out there and make a good shot. It's not so simple. It's not as simple as we make it sound a lot of times.
No, it definitely isn't, and that's and I just thought like when we had that conversation, I think some of it was on air and some of it was off air. I don't even remember exactly, but it was just like it really had my head turning as far as like, man, it's kind of fun to think about targeting does, and plus, and depending on where you're at, you're also doing very good from the management side of things. A lot of times does do need shot and they need taken out, to help with that buck to doe ratio, and also just being able to learn how to draw and keep your emotions in check, especially for newer hunters. And when I say newer hunters, it's not even just that, but even like myself, when I'm targeting bucks and maybe there's a couple deer that I'll shoot in a year, that's not very many chances. Like as if you're shooting a few does a year plus a couple bucks or whatever, you start reducing that curve and reducing the aspects as you get later in your hunting career as far as making those mistakes, because you're starting to build that muscle memory in your head of being able to make it happen in the moment of truth and seeing what you can get away with and what you can't. And I think that's such a big part of hunting does and doing that.
Well, for sure. And I kind of view it the same way as I'm sure you get asked constantly from people who are like, hey, I want to go on my first Western hunt. I want to hunt mule deer, spot and stock mule deer. I want to go antelope hunting or elk hunting, and I hear the same thing all the time. And it's amazing to me. And everybody does this. So I'm not shitting on anybody specifically, but it's like people have such like a high expectations out of that stuff. And I'm like, why do you think you're going to be good at that? Like if you've never spotted and stalked antelope, like with a bow, and you think you're just going to go out there and be good at it, I'm like, that's crazy. And if you go out there and you're like, I want one that's 75 inches, 76 inches, a big one, like, okay, you might get a stalk in on your entire hunt. You might. Or if you go and you just hunt whatever antelope's legal, you might get 10 or 12 stalks in a week. And you do that for a couple of years in a row, like, okay, one guy might have a better trophy room because he might luck into that big one, but who's going to be the better antelope hunter?
Yeah.
It's not the person who only does one stalk every year. It's the same thing with, like you said, with the big buck deal. Man, there's a difference between getting around deer and killing them. And, you see this, I'm sure you hear all the time, like people are like, oh, I want to tell Beau my favorite, big buck story. Like everybody who encounters like the biggest buck of their life, they screw it up every freaking time. Like it's always a story about how you hit them in the brisket or you shot over their back and used the wrong pin. I'm like, yeah, you don't have any experience at that. Like you can't get enough life experience shooting at 160 inches if you're like out grinding on like normal people ground. So you got to go, okay, what can I do? Like, how can I get better at this and enjoy it more? And man, does can do it for you.
Oh yeah. And so if I look back at like at my especially with bow hunting, as I go back and look at it, when I first started, I was seeing my dad like hunting these big bucks and doing this, and I was like, that's what I wanted to do. And I had shot 3 or 4 bucks before I'd even shot a doe. And that was the wrong way of doing it, because now when I shot those 3 or 4 bucks, I'd miss 3 to 4 times that amount because I didn't know how to act in that situation. And everyone, I remember growing up, everyone's like, Beau's the luckiest guy for opportunities. Like, I always have these opportunities, these stories, these big deer that would come in that I'd shoot over their back, or I'd have this problem and that problem. And I think a lot of it, when it comes down to the shooting aspect, is having those repetitions and being comfortable, as comfortable as you can be in that time. Obviously, there's a lot of mechanics and mind things you can work on, but just being around it and getting those reps in is so critical. And I think that, we do try to shortcut it, and some of us are to blame on the aspect of talking about big bucks all the time and creating this. I have this submission for listeners called Mountain Buck Monday that I post every Monday, success stories, and a lot of the stories will start out with, it's about my 3rd year hunting the big woods, and he wasn't the one I was after, but I'm happy with him. And it's like, man, like, that's a freaking beautiful deer. Like, why don't say that to start it out, because like it takes a long time to get consistently successful, and whether that's the big woods or wherever, I'm just using that as an example. But I think that that's why I think that, like, someone like talking to someone like you is the right example of it, because I feel like you've went through that process your whole life of, like, you've shot a lot of animals, and that's helped you become a good hunter at shooting big bucks, at shooting whatever. That's why when I started out this podcast with the introduction, I mean, I feel like that's kind of been your repertoire there.
Well, it has. And you know what? I mean, maybe this makes me sound like a freaking psycho. I like shooting deer, man. I love that feeling of just like when you green light yourself and like now he walks this way, she comes in this way, whatever. Like, when am I going to draw? Where am I going to settle that pin? I freaking love that feeling. Like, we've been hunting pheasants a whole bunch in the late season here. And it reminds me of, when I look at my dogs, 'cause I'm running a lab, so I've got flushers, and I can see that tail going, and I'm like, that dog's birdie. Or, we're in the cattails, so a lot of times you just hear it, and you hear that tail just whacking those cattails, and like that moment where you're like, somebody's getting up here. And, it might be a bunch of hens, it might be a rooster, you don't know. I love it. Like, I want more of it. And that's kind of what I figured out through deer hunting, because I started out, I shot everything, and then I went through the big buck phase. And then when I started to travel to public land hunt a lot, I got lucky and I killed some big deer, but I was like, this is a different thing. Like, this is not devoting a whole season to one farm in Minnesota or whatever. This is like, I got 4 or 5 days, and if somebody drives their 4-wheeler in here when I'm sitting, like, one day might be screwed up or one sit. And I realized the places I went to that would sell me more than just a buck tag, I enjoyed it a hell of a lot more. You know what I mean? Like, in Oklahoma really put it over the edge for me, because you'd buy a tag down there and you can shoot 6 deer on it. So you're like, man, I hear some stick crack coming my way. I'm knocking up, man. Like, I'm ready to go because I got something I can shoot. And I just realized, like, it made me enjoy it more. Just going, having lower standards in different places, and just like, I feel like it made me better, like a better decision maker, and like better at movements and better at draw timing and all that stuff. And now I'm just like, I just don't care. Like, I'm just like, I want to have fun and shoot deer,
Yeah, no, definitely. So, like, all right. So when you travel to some of these hunts, and that's one of the things that I've learned and made the mistake of, is you have to plan ahead of time as far as getting doe tags, because a lot of places, like, for example, Pennsylvania, you have to apply earlier than just buying it at Walmart. And sometimes that, or before the season, I learned in West Virginia, I went down there and bought my tags, the season already open, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get a couple doe tags. And I was like, I can't, because it was too late. And I was like, man, I really screwed that up. So because I wanted to practice spot and stalking on does, so that when I had that opportunity at a great buck that I wanted to shoot, that I could, I had the reps in, because that's not what I'm used to doing. And so talk a little bit about, like, kind of I guess a little more detail on what you just said with those opportunities. Like, are you hunting? Say if are you like targeting bucks and shooting does as they come by, or how are you looking at doe hunting?
My strategy, unless I'm in a place, maybe out west where I can really glass and pin something down, I go find a concentration first and then I whittle it down. And so, and this happens to me everywhere I go now, just about. It's like I want to get around deer first and then I'm going to make my decision. So a lot of times I'm just hunting whatever sign, and it's not just buck sign, like I like pounded trails and crossings and river crossings and whatever. And then, sometimes you get in there and you see a buck do something. I mean, a lot of the bucks I've killed on public land, I've been just, how do I dive into this concentration of deer? And then you see something and then you adjust to that, maybe once or twice, and then you kill a buck. But a lot of times if I have a doe tag, I'm like, I just want to find that concentration of deer and whoever comes down the trail. And, sometimes, I mean, I've had nights where I shot a doe walking through and then 10 minutes later I shot a buck, like that stuff happens. And so to me, it really kind of is like, it's just not such a narrow focus. I'm like, I want to get around a concentration. And then if I got a doe tag in and a big lone doe comes by, she's in trouble. Unless for some reason, I think I just don't want to take care of it or whatever. Or, sometimes, we might be dealing with this next year over in Wisconsin where I hunt, because this winter has started out pretty gnarly already over there. So we might be seeing one of those deals where we get a pretty good winter kill. And so then, it's like, even if they'll sell you tags, if I'm in a place where I'm like, I don't need to shoot a doe here, I won't. But that situation over there taught me, even when the deer numbers are up, it's like, man, it's hard to get around a little group of deer and get one in range. I mean, those deer they're dealing with wolves and bears and coyotes and bobcats and tons of hunters. And so it's just like, find that concentration, work it, and see what it's going to give you before you blow it up and you got to start over.
Yeah, I think that's such a good approach, and it's something that sounds so simple. Find the deer, but like it really, that's what it comes down to. And then working from there, as far as like before you get into those specific tactics. I think that's a good point, and I think you'll learn so much about the bucks when you're hunting those does, like especially late season. Like when you're thinking about late season and you're focusing on these areas that have concentrations, whether the weather's bad and they're kind of yarded up, or, I guess more deer in specific locations, big woods, maybe it's a logging cut that they're feeding in, whatever. You won't, I've found when I've hunted does in the late season that I'll see bucks too and have, that opportunity to learn more so than anything about those deer. And I think that's something that kind of gets brushed under the rug, as far as like not, thinking, oh, we're just going out to shoot does. But if you look at it from the mindset of, I'm learning about bucks too, at the same time.
Well, yeah. And I mean, we don't really talk about this a lot, but if you go out, if I go out and it's like October 30th, we're right pre-rut, bumping up on something, when it's going to get really good, you see that Forky walking through the woods or whatever, like people, I'll watch him, but what is he teaching you? When you think about does, like, here's a prime example, right? Let's say you're hunting opening weekend and you've got a standing bean field to sit over, right? You've been glassing bucks or whatever, and you go in there and it's been a west wind or a south wind for, most of the time you've been scouting, and you go in there and it's an east or a north or something. And so you're like, I'm going to go to this corner because this is where the bucks were coming out. And then the first deer you see are the does, and they come out of a trail that you're just like, why are they coming out there? And it's like, you don't give it enough weight, right? Because you're like, it's just a doe and two fawns, who cares? And then the bucks come out over there. And then you're like, oh, why did the bucks come out there? It's like, because they're using the wind. Like, they changed their approach to get in there. They change, like staging, this time of year when you see deer using some kind of food source, the first ones to get there are going to be the does, most likely. How do they approach? Like, how long do they sit there back in the brush and watch it? Like, how are they using the wind? Because we always talk about these bucks like they're like such a different species. I'm like, no, man, they're just like last in line a lot of times. They're like, you go out, risk your ass. Like, I'm going to sit back here. I don't need to move yet. When I get out there, I could push anybody off the prime food I want. So it's a different thing. But when you start to go, okay, instead of just kind of like passively watching deer, like, oh, it's cool, I saw some does walk through. If you're hunting them, you're just paying attention different. And you're like, what trees did they walk by? Like, why did they approach from this corner, or why were they bedded in those cattails and not back there in the thicket? And it's like, well, what are the conditions? Who else is going to follow those conditions to those kind of advantageous spots? Like that, all that stuff makes you better.
Yeah, and also you hit a really good point about we give the bucks too much credit because does. How many times have you seen like I'll look in like hill country in the big woods where you'll get bucks that'll bed out around these points and does might bed in a group on the top. You know, they have each other to kind of keep themselves safe facing different directions. But if you're walking out there, you blow those does out, you never usually see the bucks because they're a warning sign for that buck that drops off on the edge. And the same thing when they come out to feed. You know, if they're coming out to, if it's in, you know, ag country, wherever the food source is, or a cut or some sort of grasses on a power line or gas line that you see, those does come out first, and they're the ones that are kind of doing the, you know, the intel looking. And then when they're out there, the bucks feel more comfortable. There's already does out there. The danger's probably not, you know, immediate. So, you
Yep.
know, they're using those does, like you said, as a kind of a test dummy for them.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just more antlerless deer. You know, I mean, if you're hunting 3.5, 4.5, 5.5-year-old bucks, there's not going to be very many of them in most places. And it just appears like there's a lot of does. But I always look at it and I go, you know, if you have a 4.5-year-old doe in a high hunter density area, that deer's going to be just as good at not getting killed as a 4.5-year-old buck. Like
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe even a little better because, you know, just having to take care of fawns and move them around and get them food and stuff, like they have to live a little riskier, less selfish of a life. And I just think, man, like if you can go out and you can find them and you can put an arrow behind their shoulder like consistently, like you're not gonna have trouble with bucks. Like you're gonna get that down too.
Yep. Nope, that makes sense. So I guess since we are approaching kind of this late season time frame, what do you have? What do you have as far as tags in your pocket, or what are you looking at doing here in the late season as far as deer hunting goes? I know you spend a lot of time with the dogs and birds at this time of year, but are you going to be doing any deer hunting for yourself?
Oh yeah, I've got a doe tag left here in Minnesota. You know, our season's gonna be over here real soon, but I'm really working this one group of does on this property I can hunt, and they just moved back in after getting really pushed out by the landowners shotgun group and some muzzleloader hunting, and I'm keeping a little eye on them and just giving them like a little false sense of security and kind of just trying to, you know, I where I live right now, you know, like if there's pretty good deer travel, it's pretty obvious, right? Like the trails are pretty obvious. We have a lot of snow this year. You know, this is not the situation I'm talking about. It's not like a terribly difficult thing to figure out, but they just got piss pounded for the whole season, and they know there's a sanctuary right across the road. So I'm just letting them settle in, and I'm waiting. And a couple nights before the season ends, I'll go in there and saddle up on some of these trails where you like stay away from the landowners ladder stands and stuff, because you know they get hunted all season. Those deer like figure this stuff out, and so they're using the kind of the sloughs and the swamps. And so I'm gonna specifically target does the last, you know, probably 2 or 3 times in the last week, and just try to play it safe, because I know I might get one good hunt in there. And if the conditions are right, if there's some wind or something, I should be able to draw. Otherwise, they're going to bust me and I'll be screwed. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm working on now. And the other thing I have is I have a place in southwestern Wisconsin that stays open all the way through January. And so I'm going to go run down there in the middle of January and try to shoot one more doe and see if I can. And that'll be easier. That place gets a lot less pressure, but they get really wadded up in there. And if you don't, you know, if your approach sucks, or if it gets super cold and they're bedded right on the edge, and that, you like you said, that first one picks you up walking in, the whole thing's blown out. So it's not as challenging as a lot of hunting could be, but it's still like, if you're not kind of on your A game, it's going to be trouble, you know. And that's the other thing too, is like, you know, the noise this time of year, any little noise you make. And one of the hardest things that I have when I'm hunting does in the late season is just like getting drawn on them without getting busted. Like that movement is just, I don't care like how smooth you can do it. any little creak or a little, like, your elbow brushing against a tree or anything like that, it's like there's no tolerance for that. And I kind of love that because it's like you better, if you don't do this right, you don't get them.
Yeah, I mean, there's no foliage on the trees, so you stick out easier.
Yep.
You're sticking out in the tree easier. You have to either go higher or be, I guess, better with not moving. As far as being in that tree, yeah, everything's quiet because again, there's not any leaves on the trees. There's not a whole lot of stuff blowing around. It's just like it reminds me of like when I hunted in Alberta, in November, but it's so quiet up there that any movement ticks them off. And it was funny because one thing I think of examples. I was hunting bucks up there, but I was sitting in a tree stand and I had a doe come in and a buck was following her, and this was like a 6-year-old deer, and they were at like 8 yards. Okay, they were close to me right there, and that buck never once looked up at me in the tree, and I stuck out pretty good because like I wasn't that high, and there's not any leaves, and those aspen trees are just like poles, so like you kind of stick out a little bit. And I was tucked up against the tree, but that doe, she saw me like multiple times. She never took off, but she'd do the look and then kind of head down and look up, doing that whole thing. A couple times I just didn't move, and but that buck never looked up at me. And he's an old buck, and this doe that was a mature doe was way more turned on than he was with it. But you're right with that late season stuff. It's cold. It's hard for after sitting for a while to be able to draw your bow back and do it smoothly, quietly, all of those different things. Those deer just are turned on. They've been hunted all year. It's a whole nother situation when you're thinking about it. It doesn't matter again where you're hunting at. That whole moment of truth portion of it and trying to make it happen is the same.
Yeah. And man, you're so right. I remember when I kind of first started figuring out how to get around some big bucks. Because when I was growing up, like if somebody killed like Pope and Young buck, it was like, holy shit, like that's a big deal, right? And so it was like they weren't even like on our radar really. Like you were never gonna see one. You certainly weren't gonna shoot one, you know? And then when I finally started to get it, like where 1 or 2 times a season I'd have an encounter, I was always just so amazed, especially right in that pre-rut Halloweenish time where I would just look up and they're just walking through the woods. Like, sometimes head down, sometimes head up, but not the way the does did it. Like not the way that they would, take their time and check stuff out. It was just like they were just like master of their domain, not scared of anything. And it kind of like made me feel like they just aren't moving as much. But when they do, they don't look like they're scared of anything. And not always, sometimes
Yeah.
they do, but a lot of times they just like have this swagger to them where they're like, they don't look that concerned. They don't look up as much a lot of times. And then you'll get those does where you just like, you see that doe with 2 fawns coming in, she's got the big long nose, and you're like, oh God, she's going to bust me.
Yeah.
Like you're just like, I hope she just doesn't blow too much and screw the whole thing up. And that's so consistent how often that happens. And then you see those bigger deer, and so many times they come in, even when you call them, sometimes they're just not, it's just a different thing, a different kind of encounter.
Yeah, and those does like you said with them looking up and they spot you so much more than the bucks do. And earlier in the season, I feel like when they do, and I think you brought this up when we were talking last time, but it's so true is when those does look up and they'll do like the stomp and then maybe the head thing. They'll do that earlier in the year, but as they've either been shot at or been spooked really bad a few times, now we get later in the season, they're not going to give you those opportunities of like, all right, they're going to blow at you a couple times and then you're still going to have a chance to draw and shoot them. Like
Nope.
that doesn't happen as much in the late season, especially after they've been pressured.
Yep.
Public, private,
Well,
don't matter.
no, and I mean, you can see it's such a like the hunting media, like there's such a skewed view of this stuff, right? Like most of the people who've been creating hunting content for a long time have really good spots to hunt. And so if you see like videos of it, it's does pouring out into the brassicas or whatever food plot or field, and then the big guy shows up and they kill him. And it's like we've just had this sort of just pounded into us over and over and over again that that's just how it's going to go. Like it's just that easy. And then you get out there in the real world and you go hunt them and you're like, man, they're just as savvy of a prey animal as anything with antlers on its head. They just are. And there just happens to be more of them. And we just kind of like discount it. And I think it's insane, man. Like I think it's a great way to enjoy your season and just get better. Like go try to fill your freezer a little bit. Let's see how it goes, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
can I go on a rant for a second?
Yeah, go on a rant. I love Tony's rants.
uh, I I'm gonna try to be careful here. So, I, anybody who knows me knows that I do not like social media very much, but I get sucked in just like everybody else. I have to do it for my job. Anyway, like a week ago, I was scrolling through Instagram, and you know how they'll start feeding you other people. Oh, you might like to follow this person, might like to follow this person, whatever. This post showed up, and it was this woman. I don't know her, never met her, don't know who she is. I don't even know her name. I don't know where she lives, but she had posted this just like, you can't kill the big ones if you shoot the little ones. She was standing next to a rub, and you gotta let them go, and all this like trophy stuff. And I know the age of the buck that made this rub, and I'm like, who is this chick? And so I looked at her, like her feed, and she killed some freaking big deer. Every one of them, there's like years of shed antlers there. You know what I mean? In the photos. And I'm like, okay, so you're out here telling everybody that they have to pass up little bucks to wait for them to get super mature. And you're clearly hunting a place where you can raise deer and they're coming back year after year, and you're obviously managing them. And I don't know where she lives, but I'll bet you money it's Kansas or Iowa, because those were big, just the look of it. Maybe not, maybe somewhere else. But I was like, do you not understand that most people don't have that? You know what I mean? Like most people are out there and they don't have that opportunity to just pass up a buck and see him next year. Like it's not gonna freaking happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at that, I was like, this is so gross. Like instead of just like being appreciative of the opportunity you have, because it's great, like you have an awesome place to hunt, target 160s. I don't give a shit. But you're out there like telling people who might be on public land or might have 3 years of hunting under their belt to do that. I'm like, that's like such the wrong message. Like, and I always look at this, and you know how this is. And this probably makes me sound so petty, but I'm like, I'll bet you couldn't go kill a button buck on public land if you had the whole season. You know what I mean? Like if you can't go sit on a box blind on a food plot, like I don't know if you can get it done. Like, and that kind of messaging just drives me crazy.
Oh no, definitely, and that's where I got a little bit of slack last year when I went up to New York after I'd shot my biggest archery buck in Pennsylvania. I go to New York on the first day and I shoot one of my smallest bucks that I've ever killed with a bow, and people are like, why don't you just shoot a doe instead of most of these people from New York saying I'm coming to their state and shooting their younger deer or whatever. But it's like, okay, first of all, there really doesn't have to be any anybody doesn't have to have a reason to justify what they shoot. That's up to them. But I am going to justify from the standpoint for people to learn from. But like, if I want to get good at doing something or doing it, I also need to have fun with it. So there's two aspects the way I look at any hunt that I go into. And there's places that I'll go into and I'll be like, I want to shoot a big deer, and that's the experience I'm going for, and I'm willing to go home without it. Then there's other things where I'm like, I want to go into a brand new area that I've never hunted before, see what kind of things work, what applies, and I want to come home with some meat. And in that situation, it was like I got to stalk in on a buck on the ground in the timber, feeding on some acorns that was on there in the middle of the day. There was tree stands all over, illegal four-wheeler trails on the top of the hills. I was just working my way down these benches, using the thermals to come from the top and work my way down and slip into 37 yards and be able to get a shot on this deer and then pack him out and take him home. Like, that was awesome. It's like, yeah, could I went and shot a doe instead of that? Actually, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I could have. Like, that was the only deer that I saw.
I know. And you buy the tag for the experience.
Yeah.
Like, and those people wouldn't have been happy if you'd have shot a 150 incher either.
No.
Like, if you're the kind of person who's pissed about somebody coming into your state and shooting one of your quote unquote deer, you're going to be pissed no matter what it is. And it's like, okay, so you shoot a little buck and people get mad at you. You shoot a big buck, people get mad at you. You kill a doe, and it's like, okay, well, what if that doe would have had 6 buck fawns in her life? Like, it doesn't freaking matter. None of this shit matters.
No.
Like, it's not that important. And that's one of the things that I've like with that girl's Instagram post. I was like, man, we're not curing childhood cancer here. Like, you're not doing anything that special. We're murdering freaking rabbits with antlers, dude. Like, this is not like, you know what I mean? Like, it's awesome, but it really doesn't matter. And it really doesn't matter what any individual hunter shoots. Like, who cares?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I don't care, like, whoever that girl is, that woman that was hunting, like, if that's what she wants to target, like, man, that's more power to you. That's freaking awesome. Some big deer. It's just like that's not one realistic for everybody, and I'm not, and I'm also like, if someone does have great land and property to do that, I think that's freaking awesome. And I'm not one of those that must be nice type of person with it. But you also have to look at what you have available and what's the realism of hunting there. Like, I don't know. That's just something that I think about a lot. And it's like in Pennsylvania, and I obviously always refer back to Pennsylvania because that's my home state and where I spend most of my time. But I hunt a lot. I scout a lot. I know a lot of areas, and I know I'm still going to struggle shooting a doe in the late season. Like, that's going to be a trophy like that. If I'm able to make that happen, I have 2 tags. The likelihood of me filling both those tags is not very high, and I have more time than most people. So let's put that all into perspective as we're thinking about it. But I don't know. It's interesting. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, part of it is a symptom, and we're all guilty of this, right? Like, we want to paint ourselves as badasses, and we're working super hard, and like really grinding it out. But so like, because we're kind of wired toward that, it's harder to just be honest about the advantages you have. And I had people say that to me. I've had a couple years where I was just like had like really good run on animals, like multiple Pope and Young bucks on public land, like elk, deer, mule deer, whatever. Like, I've had some years that were like amazing, and people are like, man, like, I can't believe you can do that. Like, that's like so awesome. I'm like, well, yeah, it's cool, but I'm like, I have so much time, or I did when I was doing a lot of that, like tons of free gear showing up. Like, I'm incentivized to do this because my paycheck depends on it. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a different thing. And it's, when you look at guys like the hunting public guys, and he's, oh man, they're killing, good bucks every year on public land all over the place. It's like, yeah, like they're getting more experience in a season than most people get in like a decade or two. Like, really, like, and I'm not like, I think it's awesome what they're doing. They're good hunters, but you have to recognize that and go like, man, you put a pack of 6 good hunters together, and you're like, here, all your bills are paid all year. All you got to do is go out and like make this happen. There's a lot of weight off of their shoulders, and there's a different pressure there, but it's that experience that's stacking up, layering up over and over again, that's just making them killers. And like, that's a huge advantage. Like, we don't really talk about that kind of stuff a lot. And if you're somebody who's listening to this, who's like, I get 6 days a year or 8 days a year to hunt or something, like, okay, that you're not going to do what a lot of these people can do, because that's just not enough time. Like, you'll never get there. So like, how do you get better? Like, if you want to get better and you want to kill more deer, like, okay, maybe lower your standards, maybe go hunt does now on public land when nobody else is out there. Like, find some ways to do that, because that's going to make you better, and it's going to be more fun.
Yeah. And that's like, just, you made a really good point with that. And when I was just talking with Lee Ellis from Seek One, and I told you about him, but he had killed 3 deer over 170 inches this year, and he goes, he's like, I'm trying to make it, in the videos that I'm producing on this, is like, listen guys, this is what I do. Like, I drive around the country door knocking, trying to get permission on these things to find these deer. That is not realistic to the everyday person. That's a lot of entertainment that comes with it. Now, I hope that can, you can have, show that it's possible and you can have goals of it, but like doing that in multiple states and everything is just it's not realistic to everybody. There's no shortcut for time. There's no shortcut for time and experience. There's things that can help you with getting information and everything. And that's obviously why why you and I have jobs. It helps people reduce that learning curve, but there's still nothing that replaces time and experience. And I think that's a very good thing to note. And I saw it so much this year with messages I was getting during the warm rut and everything that we had across the country, but people that were newer to hunting the big woods just being frustrated and it's like, man, that's a part of it. Like I'm frustrated too. I'm struggling too. Like that's unfortunately or fortunately, that's what kind of keeps us keep coming back, or the ones that really want it, just keep trying to learn. And it's a lifetime process. There's not something where there's a set end goal that you're going to do good for it. So
Well, yeah, and I think that's such a great example, right? Is like, okay, let's say you are in Pennsylvania and you're like, I'm going to kill a mature big woods buck this year on public land. And it's like, you go out and you bide your time and you scout around a little bit, but you're like, the rut's coming, like it's going to save me. And then it's like the rut comes and it's 25 degrees hotter than you expect. And of course, everybody's out anyway because it's the rut. And you just realize like, okay, maybe my goal was a little bit too lofty. Or maybe I need to change this now that it's late season and just go hunt deer and figure out how to do that. Because, man, I think you lock yourself into some of this stuff and it's like so easy to set goals that are probably just not going to happen, and it's like, man, it's not that much fun doing something where you're almost assured failure. And, like and everybody, this goes for everything. This isn't just deer hunting. Like, look at how many people are going to start a diet on the new year, or like, oh, I'm going to start working out. And not only am I going to start working out, I'm going to do 3 miles a day on the treadmill, and I'm going to go to the weight room every day, and I am giving up all sugar, and I'm going to go total keto and all this stuff. And it's like, nope, it's too much. Pick one, work your way into it, and like earn those steps, because it's like you see this with deer hunters constantly, where it's like the person, and I don't want to sound like a total prick here, but like somebody with not a lot of experience or not a good place to hunt or not enough time to go scout the way you need to is like, I just want X or Y. It's like, if you're okay failing at that and like that's the goal you want to stick to, great. Like, do that. Who cares? Like, if it's not taking anything away from you, great. But if by the time, mid-November rolls around and the gun season's coming on and you're going to be like, God, I wish I would have shot that buck back in October or whatever, like, think about that stuff, because it's important, because you don't want to make this so it sucks. And there's enough, like you're talking about that warm rut, like there's enough misery just built into even a great season, where it's like, the more that you just bring that on, just because maybe your standards are out of whack with your experience or something, the worse it gets, and it's just not fun.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was talking to my dad about this, who's been hunting for so long, and every year he kills a good buck, and last year in 2021 he killed an exceptional once in a lifetime Pennsylvania deer, and it was 170 inches on public land. Like, it's like everyone's asking him, where do you go next? Like, what's your next? He's like I'm going to still do the same thing that I've been doing. He's like, yeah, if something comes along like that again, maybe I'll target him and go after. He's like, but I like to have fun. He's like, he's always just driven that in my head. He's like, I hunt for the experience. He's like, if I can call in a buck and he comes in, he's tearing up, he's got the hair standing on the back of his neck, and I shoot him at 10 yards and he goes over and he's not the biggest deer out there, like, I'm still just as pumped. And I think that's such a cool attitude to have, and I think that gives you longevity. And as you're talking about like New Year's resolutions, so to speak, I even go back to that when I'm looking at goals I have for the podcast and business and whatever else. Like, all of a sudden I'll have all these things I want to do, and then realize if I try to do all those things, I'm going to fail probably at all of them. But it's like, you do one thing consistently and you'll work your way better than you are if you try spreading yourself too thin. Then that relates to hunting. It relates to everything in life. I feel like it's something that I'm constantly trying to remind myself and work towards.
Oh, big time, man. I think goals are so important. And I mean, I think it is a really powerful motivator if you're like, I've always killed 2.5-year-olds or a year and a half, 2.5. I want that 3-year-old. Like I want something that's 115, 120 plus type of thing or whatever. I think that shit's great. Same thing with working out or whatever. But I think, a lot of times we kind of internalize what we see other people doing and we go, okay, I'm going to do that. Or we go, you know what? I've been killing 3.5-year-old 8 pointers on grandpa's farm for the last 10 years. I'm going to go try one of these public land hunts somewhere. And, that's kind of like my benchmark. And it's like now that goal is not the same anymore. Like you have to recognize that, right? Like it'd be the same thing if, I've had in the last 5 years, I've had years where I've run 1,000 miles and 1,100 miles and 700 miles. And kind of depends on what I have going on, what I want to do, like if I'm going to draw an elk tag or how do I feel. But I couldn't make 1,000 or 1,100 mile goal if I went out and I rolled my ankle. Like if I went and fell on the ice today, like that might change. Circumstances change. You got to look at that and go, okay, like I don't want to give up on being sort of a goal driven person, but now there's a different set of circumstances here. Or I'm just not having fun with this. Like it's the wrapping up that 6 miler or whatever, it doesn't feel good to me anymore. Like, well, what do you need to do? Because you still need to do something like that. But how do I need to tweak it to make sure that I'm okay with this and I'm going to show up tomorrow? Because I don't want to, like, you don't want to be the person who's like 140s are bust and now it's late season and you're not going to hunt because you're not going to go out on public land and kill a 140. Like what's the goal now? Or if you've got your rutcation and it's day 5 of 7 and it's been 75 degrees for 3 days and then 2 days of pouring rain and you might have 2 good days. Now, is it still 150 or bust? Or is it like, man, I want to go enjoy a full day dark to dark in the woods. And if something comes down the trail that's not quite as big, but it gives me a good shot, am I going to take it? Like, I think that stuff's important.
Yeah, no, it definitely is, so that's like right now my goal for this late season is killing a doe with my flintlock muzzleloader. Like that's a goal of mine that I'm taking pretty seriously, and I'm not even going against age class of does. I'm not even looking for a really big old doe. Now I'm not gonna shoot a fawn, but I'd be happy with a middle of the road doe that comes rolling in, and maybe she's not experienced enough to see me moving or me trying to get the hammer back and looking up and look at that amateur.
Let me make a quick plea here. Fawns are delicious and super easy to drag out, super easy to butcher. I'm just saying, let's just keep our options open.
Okay, all right. Maybe I need to talk to you before I head out in the woods there the day after Christmas. So
I say that like jokingly, but I did shoot a fawn last year in the late season, and it was delicious, and I didn't care. I literally went out hunting with my buddy in January and had 2 doe tags, and he's like, what do you, and he had a buck tag. So he's like, I'm only shoot a buck. We were in a blind together. And I was like, listen, the first 2 antlerless deer that come up here that get close are going to get shot. And I looked in the woods and here comes this lone fawn in. I was like, well,
here we go.
This one's in trouble. And I shot it and it ran over and died. And then a little while later, a doe came in. I shot that one too. And they were delicious.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, all right. So looking at late season, let's focus on the public land side, for this question specifically. What about food? Like what are you looking at from a food standpoint, or things that maybe people aren't thinking about as you're focusing on hunting some does in late season?
My public land late season hunts are so different than my private land. I go pretty standard on private land, and I'll try to sit food or sit something like, a direct route to a destination food source. Public land for me is like all tied to cover. Like where are they going to be bedding? Where are they going to go back to bedding to? And if there's a food source around, it depends what it is. If I'm over in northern Wisconsin, it's going to be a clear cut or something, right? Like if I'm down south a little farther, it's going to be some kind of food source that probably isn't on the public, but is on a neighboring property. But for me, public land late season is like cattail sloughs and willow thickets and clear cuts and whatever. If I would go there to hunt cottontails, Like then I'm like, okay, this is probably a place where they're going to be close to. Because I don't, you know, I was like so frustrated for so much of my life growing up, where I'd read the articles about late season hunting, and even when I got into the industry and I was editing articles on it, I'm like, I've never had a situation where I could just go sit on like a pick cornfield and have deer just pour out there. You know what I mean? Like they got hunted too hard. And so you'd see them staging back in the woods, or maybe one deer would come out somewhere with the wind right. And so I just started hunting them back in the cover. And like, okay, I'm gonna catch them just like I do in October, staging somewhere. And so for me, it's like the thicker the better. And like we talked a little bit about the pheasant thing. Man, I was out last week in miserable conditions. It was so cold. I still can't feel my thumb. Like it was stupid. And I kept jumping deer in these spots. Like I've jumped 3 bucks in one spot, like does, and you just look at it and you go, there's no way to approach those deer in here. Like they're bedded in the cattails. Like they're gonna know you're coming in. You can't see them. They get up and bound away. Sometimes you can't even see them. You can hear them, especially this year where it's really dry. So the cattails are like 7 feet tall. And I look at that and I go, like, that's such a telling thing. Like that's, the geothermal cover, no approach for a predator. Maybe a coyote could get in on them somehow. Maybe. But you just look at that and go, that's what they need now. So how do you get as close to that as possible? And how do you like predict where they're going to go? And I love that part of it, man.
Yeah, and it's really not that much different than other times of the year, as far as being is looking at that, and a lot of times those places we cover have the food built into it as far as browse, anyways.
Yep.
Clear cuts having the briars and just some of the new growth that's coming up and have that, and even mountain laurel, like in areas with that, like they'll eat those twigs and everything late season. And if it's real bad, they'll be eating on some of the conifer trees and stuff. I've seen hemlocks browsed at deer level underneath it when it's bad weather. They don't want to go up out in the open and feeding on some of the grasses there. If they can get up and have that wind block and everything and still feed on the branches. At least that's my thought process on why they're doing it. But they'll eat just about anything. I've seen areas where deer are eating the bark off of trees and I think that's more of they just didn't have very much food around. But I agree with you on the cover standpoint. And it's actually, in my opinion, it's easier late season to find that cover because there's not leaves on the trees that's creating, more cover, especially when you get into big woods types areas where there's just like a ton of unbroken timber. You can kind of break that down a little bit more as you're walking around and see where that cover lies.
Yep. Well, and what you're talking about there with seeing them just kind of, turn to some of these really low quality food sources, I think that stuff's so important too. Like, you learn that when you winter scout a lot or shed hunt a lot, and you see those concentrations of deer and maybe find an antler in the middle of the sumac when they're eating it, or some horsetail or something. And you're like, this is, not directly going to put me on a deer now. Cause a lot, obviously if it's winter scouting or something, it's past the season, but seeing how those deer use that stuff and how they go, like we talked about on the Wired to Hunt podcast about how, if you're in a situation where they cleaned all the white oaks up or the white oak acorns in October, and now you're out there in late December, early January, and those deer have switched to those red oak acorns, man, that's so valuable. And I just think like it's so fun to kind of step outside of your comfort zone and be like, I'm not sitting in mid-October on a pond or whatever, like that I would just like to do, like my dreamy kind of whitetail hunt that so often just falls apart, or like that sweet funnel or pinch point you find and you're like, I'm going to ride the rut out. That's great. And like you can learn from that. You're just going to see deer, you might kill a deer, but when you go, and this is all season, right? When you go, it's hot, super cold, super windy. You go in the late season when you don't really want to go and everybody else is ice fishing or hunt rabbits or whatever, and you start seeing like, okay, the deer are using this way. Like I think every time you get a real glimpse into their life, like what they're doing now, even summer scouting, any of that, it's just like so beneficial to you. You just understand how they operate better. And I think that's so cool that we have that opportunity.
Oh yeah. I think that's such a good point. Is just like letting them letting them teach you with that, and depending on what the food source is at that time, and when you are on public ground, one thing that you did mention though is that I think is important is if you find an area where and I like to have different spots for different times of the year. I mean, just completely different areas sometimes. And if there's spots that are public that butts up against private that has ag and there's deer funnel, I mean, that sounds like a pretty dang good late season spot to kind of to go in there. Now, you're not going to be hunting the edges of those fields, but a lot of times they might not even be coming out in daylight to do that anyways, and you can be back closer to wherever you think that they could be bedding and using some of those. I almost kind of look like the reverse of early season, but similar type things. You're really trying to figure out where they're living at and focusing on that in accordance to food. But it's just not, there's not as like for the most part, there's not like that real designated food source that they're funneling into when you get into some of these public spots, that there's just not that, it's a lot of browsing. And one thing that I learned, I want to say it was probably like 8 years ago or so I picked up on this was, so we get a lot of, we call them leeks. Some people call them ramps, wild onions that'll grow up, and they grow up in a lot of the spring seeps. Well, one year that we had unseasonably warm January, the leeks started coming up earlier, and I was actually finding a bunch of sheds in them in March and April, and I was like, huh. And, looking at it, it's like, okay, these bucks were feeding in here because this part one was thawed out enough that these leeks were coming up, and that's where they were feeding at. And then I started paying attention to these spring seeps. And then even on the really cold years in January, and you still have tags, those places are the last to freeze over, and the deer can still dig in there. One, get water. Two, be able to just dig up any sort of browse or root systems or whatever they're feeding on in there. And also in places with oak trees that had red oak acorns that were on the ground, the deer were only able to feed on those acorns that weren't frozen into the ground right along those spring seeps. So I pay a lot of attention to spring seeps in the late season. My camera guy, Justin, always jokes with me, like whenever he spent so much time videoing me, like scouting, that he likes to throw keywords around that I use a lot. And like, we'll be like driving down the road. He's like, there's that spring seep. I bet you'd kill a big buck there. And it's just because I do put a lot of value on spring seeps late season. So that's something I picked up on that if I wasn't either scouting or hunting that time of year that I never would have even thought about.
Well, man, that's such a good lesson right there, because when you talk about certain times of year, winter, early spring, where they are really limited on food, some of the greenest food available to them is always in the water. And I ran across this this property by my house that I've been deer hunting a little bit. They let me turkey hunt there, and I can scout. I mean, it's right by my house, so I go out there and I scout a lot because I take a lot of kids out there, including my own. And so I'll be out there in March and glassing turkeys, and I'll be like, oh, the deer are in the swamp again. And you watch them, and they're pawing up and they're digging up stuff, and you go down there and there'll be like little green buds in there that are way before anything else comes up. Or like that horsetail that I mentioned, that's like a green reedy plant that grows in lowland spots, and it's clearly not like a prime food source for them until they have nothing green. And I hunted deer, way early in my career. If I would go out in the late season, I would find a patch of that, and inevitably there would be a ton of deer sign in there because it's what they have now that's green, and it's always tied to that water table being right there, and it's so important to them. And you just you don't learn stuff like that unless you're out there. And it's like that lesson, like you're talking about, you might think that that's like a Pennsylvania mountains thing. Like, I'm going to find these leeks and these seeps, and it's going to be, this is it. You go some other part of the country, 800 miles away, and it's not the leeks, but it's the same concept, and those deer know it, and you can key in on that. And I even see the turkeys do it too. And I'm like, everybody has this figured out, but us. Like, we don't. We're like, there's a cut bean field or cornfield over there. That's where they're feeding, and it's like, nope. They're staging here, pawing up this stuff in the swamp because it has what they need right now. And they might end up in that field half hour after dark, but you kill them there. Like, you kill them over that water.
That's oh man, that just brought me to another thought is like, and that's where shed hunting has helped me learn a lot of these things too, because a lot of these sheds aren't being a lot of them are dropped in January, and so you're kind of looking at what they're doing at that time, and some flatter big woods areas where there's like swamps mixed in with it. Always those swampy areas, I'm finding sheds in, and there might be just like a little group of trees and blowdowns, and they're feeding on some of the dewberries and stuff that are the vines and everything that are through there. Like there, whenever I find like dewberries, I'm like, there's gonna be sheds here. It's just a matter of me finding them or if someone else picked them up earlier. And that was something that I learned a lot. And as I go into late season hunting, and the more I've done it over the last 5-6 years, especially, that's where I've put effort in and trying to focus on learning it. And I'll even run cameras even if I don't have any tags, just to try to learn more about it. But you don't even really need them as much as if you just kind of pay attention to where the concentration of deer tracks are, where they're spending their time. Snow really helps that, obviously, with being able to see in the late season, but it's a lot of fun to pay attention to that. And it all circles back to that concentration that you mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's if you have it that's so awesome about snow is blood trailing, man. Like I know it's so obvious, but one of the things that continually kind of amazes me when I end up on blood trails with people who just maybe like don't have a lot of experience is how bad they are at it. Like that's an acquired skill. Like that's a muscle you have to use. And it's so awesome when you go out and shoot one in the snow and you can, A, find the tracks, but B, like it's just written in the snow and see how, like you can look like, oh, it ran through here this way. Cause you know how it is, like it's different visualizing a blood trail in late September, early October, whatever, than it is now. It's just different. And it's so beneficial to see how they, like, oh, I shot this deer and it ran off through there. So that's great. And then you go down there and you're like, well, actually the tracks are here and it curled this way, even though in my memory cut right by that tree. And it's like, no, it was 25 feet away from that tree. And it's just easier to like kind of process that stuff and go, okay, like I'm learning right now from this because it's showing me exactly what happened. And it's real easy, clear to see. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, especially if you make a marginal shot that they're not going down right away. And there's a lot of times where like you'll have spotty blood, and when you're just tracking in the leaves, that can be difficult. You'd be like, oh, I lost blood, and you search around and you might not find that next pin drop that's your key to, going a little bit further. And it's a lot more difficult, where in the snow, you can see the actual tracks and then you follow them and okay, 50 yards later, there's more blood and you clot it up a little bit. And then 100 yards later, all of a sudden you open back up again and you're able to find that deer. And I think that teaches you a lot too. Cause I think with blood trailing, and I had a guy on last month talking about with what he's learned with using his blood tracking dogs and just going on a lot. And he's like, a lot of people give up or way earlier than they should, or aren't able to recognize things. Not even that they give up, they just don't find exactly what it is. And also, like, a lot of deer I've found don't bleed right away. A lot of situations I've had where deer will die within 100 yards, but they never started bleeding until 75. Yep. Besides maybe some blood on the arrow, or there's just so many different situations when it comes to the blood trailing aspect.
Well, and that is like, you just can't be a good hunter without that.
No,
you just got to get that experience doing it. And dude, I mean, it's like, it's amazing how often you get on a blood trail that just shows you something you didn't believe was going to happen, or just like kind of knocks you down a peg. Like I took my daughter out sometime in early October. We went out and had a doe come in the morning. I said, light her up if you want. Like, I don't care. You got 2 doe tags. So she shoots this doe and it runs off. And it was kind of a rainy, wet, early October, whatever. And I couldn't, the way I was sitting in the blind, I couldn't see the hit, but it was close, and she's a pretty good shot. So I was like, I heard it. Anyway, I was like, honey, where do you think you hit it? She's like, I think it was perfect. We go out and go to blood trail it, and it's like just a little drop here and a little drop there. And in my head, I'm not saying this, but I'm like, I don't think you hit this deer the way you think you did. And, we go a little ways and I look up and that deer's dead 50 yards away from the blind. Smoked it,
Yeah.
but barely any blood. So I'm like, what? I don't care. Like, this is awesome. So we get that deer out there and then go back that afternoon because I'm like, you got a buck tag and you got another doe tag, and there was some deer going through there. I was like, let's just go sit. Well, we're sitting and we have some does come into the edge and they're real cagey. And finally, one of them kind of breaks through. And I'm like, listen, you want another one? I don't care. Like, I'm gonna sit back. I'm gonna let you make the decision. And so, that doe comes in. She shoots at it, and I watch it run off. And I'm like, I was like, I saw that one. I'm like, she smoked this deer. So I'm like, sweet, two mature does in the same day for, a 10-year-old at that time. So we go out, wait till dark and go out, and it's kind of a little rainy, whatever. And I'm like, I've already drug one deer out of the woods today. And I'm like, okay, now I got two to butcher and whatever. Yeah. So I'm like, I want to get this over with. I want to get back to the shack. And we get in there and get on the blood trail. And it's just not good. Like, I'm like, I know that deer's not very far away. We thought we heard it fall down, but it's, whatever. So I'm like trailing it. I'm like, I don't get this. Like this, I'm getting frustrated. I'm like, I don't know why I can't find more blood. And I pull up my Onyx. This is land I've owned. I own this. I own this 30 acres. I've been on there 170 billion times. And I'm like, I think I'm going the wrong way. And so I like stand up and look out. I'm like, there's the blind. I like literally hit this blood trail and tracked it the wrong way, not paying attention. I turned around and I was like, honey, the blind's over there. We're going the wrong way. I turn around, I track it like 20 yards and there it is. And I'm like, Jesus, like, you know what I mean? And it's like, it sounds so dumb, but you get into the woods in the dark and you're hurrying. And it's like, I know this deer did this. And so I'm skipping all these steps and I know better.
Yeah.
Just like get on it, follow it, right? And you still make mistakes like that. And then you think, okay, those are two double lunged, didn't go anywhere. Neither one of them went more than like 50 yards. And now you get one that you hit in the guts, or you get that liver shot or one lung liver or whatever. And now you've got a real blood trail ahead of you. And it's like, man, I don't think you can do that enough. No. Like, I don't think that's a thing you can master.
Nope, I'm right there with you, and that's again back to the whole theme of this shooting does. That helps that helps with getting that repetition in, and I have a love-hate relationship, actually more of a hate relationship with blood trailing, just because it's like a stressful thing, especially when it's my own deer. But like, I always, anytime anybody needs help, like around home, any family members, anything, they shoot a deer, like I always go on the trail because, one, to help them, obviously, and two, I learned so much from it, and to help in my own situations and being able to recognize shots and see that. But yeah, so I'm hoping that in the next few weeks here that I get some more blood trailing in my own. Well, hopefully they just die right away, and that'll be actually better. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, man, I'm kind of torn on it. I'm the same way. Like I get nervous going out on a blood trail. Like I second guess them fast because I've been on some train wrecks, my own and other people's. And so partially I'm like, man, there's nothing better than watching them tip over. But there's also maybe nothing a little better than like I think I made a good shot and you get on that blood trail. It's like 100 yards and they're piled up. Like that's fun, you know, but it's like when you start doing that and you hit that like distance where you go, they should have been here by now. Now then all the fun's gone.
Fun's gone. Like, 100%.
Dude, that happened to me on that Wisconsin buck I shot this year. I shot it and we're filming, so it's a freaking goat rodeo. And I was like, I think I hit it really pretty good. I saw him run off, blood on his side, and gave him like 4 hours, come back, and I get on that trail and I'm like, we even watched the footage and it looked good. I'm like, okay, he's gonna be 100 yards away, and we get 100 yards away and this woods is like wide open and I'm like, there's no dead deer. You know what I mean? Like I can see 100 yards more and there's no dead deer, and I'm just like, all the excitement I had going into it gone, just drained instantly. And even I got a blood covered arrow, I got a good blood trail. I'm just like, now it's not what I thought. And that just changes everything. And he made it. I measured it on Onyx. I think the trail was like 340 yards and he was hit good. Like he was hit really well. And I was like, how is this always different? Like, how does this happen? You know what I mean? Like, how does that happen where you're like, this was a good shot and that deer made it this far? And I think he was running the whole way, but still, like, what? Why does that happen? But the more you do it, you just realize, like, I'm going to be more cautious than anybody else because I don't now things are different. Like now we're in a situation we might bump them, we might lose them, we might have to grid search, we might have to come back in the morning, blah blah blah. And the more that you just like get comfortable in those uncomfortable situations and you go blood trail them now and shoot that doe or whatever, the easier it is to just go, okay, this isn't what I thought. Now I got to be smart and I really got to do this the right way and kind of slide into that mode instead of getting frustrated and like instantly just going too fast or like, well, let's just grid search or usually they go down to the pond. I'm going to walk down there. It's like, nope, stay on the blood, figure it out.
Yep. No, definitely. And another thing I wanted to kind of go back to that you said a little while back on relation to doe hunting, and you had talking about with cover and staying close to that cover, and that kind of comes down to the setup. And I know whether you're hunting with a muzzleloader, you're hunting with a bow, whatever. I feel like at least what it was always in my head was like, oh, it's late season, and I have a gun, even though it's a muzzleloader. Like, oh, I can shoot a little bit further, I can do this. I'd sit more in this open, but my setups look the same, if not is like a bow hunting setup. And you and I talked about this, and I think that that's something else that's also very important to think about. One, whether you can shoot them a little bit further or whatever. Me with a flintlock muzzleloader, I might as well have my bow. It's about the same. As you gave a really good rule of thumb, it's like kind of double your effective bow range. That's about kind of what I am with the flintlock. But it does make you a better hunter too, of like trying to figure out those close scenarios and surgically be able to have those opportunities.
Oh man, muzzleloader hunting that way can teach you a lot. And that's when I started muzzleloader hunting in Minnesota, we couldn't use we can use scopes now, but we couldn't then. So it was, even though we were using inlines, it was still open sights. And I remember just being like, man, I can sit on the bench at the range and shoot pretty well like 100 yards with open sights. You can get a group in there. And so I remember just like going out and like, I'm just going to sit on the edge of the field. I'm just going to put my back to an oak tree like I'm turkey hunting and then I realized like, I'm not seeing the deer that I think I should because they've been getting pounded. And so then I would go sit in my bow stands that I had set up for, like October staging area stuff. I started killing deer at like 30 yards. And I'm like, okay, just like you're talking about, this is what you need to do. And I took that was really kind of what kicked me off into being pretty passionate about late season because I had kind of written it off. And then when you go muzzleloader hunting, you feel like you have that advantage. So you go and maybe you try to track one and shoot out of its bed or whatever. But you realize like if you bring your bow game, like a good bow game to the late season, whether you're carrying that open sight flintlock or whatever, or you're bow hunting, the opportunities are still there. You gotta do it right.
Yeah.
Like you're not gonna like there's not a cushion of like, oh well, I have this weapon and it's a 100-yard weapon or 75 yards. Like great, but you still have to hunt like you're hunting them with a bow, and it's just a cover based kind of thing, and it's so fun. It's just not your typical go post up on a field edge and just shoot them when they walk out.
Yeah, or like I think I read something that you had about like it's not like with a gun of sitting on a power line or sitting somewhere where you're looking at 300 yards field edge or whatever. It's like you're playing a different game, and I think you learn so much more about hunting that way and improve your skills moving forward.
Dude, I think that that's one of the biggest things that holds back gun hunters and bow hunters, to be honest with you, is we are just hardwired to sit where we can see. Like we like a nice view. We really like seeing deer. So we default to setups where we're going to maybe see them, but there's a difference between seeing them and killing them. And you just like, if you can get over that and go, you know what, I don't need, I got my 300 Win Mag or my 270 or whatever out there. Like, I don't need to be able to shoot 400 yards in each direction. I need to be where the deer are going to be. And that's like 50 yards in the thick shit. And that's where they're going to be. But it's so, think about when you go, if you draw an Iowa tag and you go hunt public land down there, you can pull up, aerial photos and you can pick your spots where people are going to leave stands up. Like it's so obvious. And it's like, yeah, that's Iowa. Maybe they do kill big bucks out of them. I don't know. But when I get down there, I'm like, the deer that I am going to shoot are going to be in the cover because everybody's doing the same kind of thing. Everybody wants to sit where they can see. And it's like, that's great. That's great if you have 1,000 acres of private land to hunt. But if you're hunting where a lot of people can be, all those deer, the bucks and the does are going to figure out like, well, I walk out in the open, it's danger zone. I stay back here in this old homestead. I'm free and clear to browse my way around all day and do whatever I want. And it's just the way it works.
I know. I used to get so mad when I was a kid and my dad would take me out. So like in Pennsylvania, you had to be 16 before you could hunt on your own. And like I'd go out with him and we'd be in these rifle spots that I couldn't see much. And I'm like, like Dad, my friends are hunting these places that are open and they got all, and he's like, no, like, this is where the deer are. You got to, and I'm like, but my gun, I can shoot it for 100 yards. Why can't I only see 60? It's like, and it took a long time to kind of understand that different mindset with it, and especially when you add pressure involved with it, and it's just think like a deer. Where are they going to feel safe moving in the daylight when you're going to be able to hunt them? Just because you see tracks out there in the open all the time isn't going to mean that they're going to be there during the daylight hours. So I think that's such a good thing too.
I mean, it is. And what you said there is like, if you hunt where there's a decent amount of pressure, that's the number one driver to every decision, and we're sold this kind of narrative that you just have to figure out the deer, right? Where does that buck bed? Like, where does he make rubs? Like, where does he feed? And it's like, all that stuff's great. Like, if you figure that out, you're definitely ahead of the curve a little bit. But if you hunt where there's pressure, it's always like, how are they reacting to the pressure? That's it. Like, there's no just figure the deer out without that part of it. Like, it just doesn't work. And if you go someplace where like there's no hunting pressure and you just get to hunt deer, it's really not that hard. Like I've been lucky. I've hunted a few places like that and it's pretty sweet because it's like that huge weight over your head of what do other hunters do to these deer? Not only what do you do to them, but like what do other hunters do? That's gone. And you're like, okay, well, where do they bed? Where do they eat? Where do they drink? Where do they sleep? Whatever. Man, everything when you're hunting pressure deer, especially the late season right now on public land, it's like, what are they doing to survive? And it's not just go out and get a bunch of calories at night. Like, yeah, they're going to do that in the dark, but like they're going to stay away from you and everybody else, and they have it freaking dialed.
Yep.
So what do you do?
Yep, that totally makes sense. So Tony, what would be if you had to leave people with one or two things to think about with late season hunting does? What would be your kind of last words to say to people before we break off?
Take it seriously. Like, it's kind of easy to just go out and sort of half-ass it and sit a stand that you want to sit or sit a spot you want to sit. But if you put a little effort into it, like there's opportunities out there. And, we talked about this on that Where to Hunt episode where, there are times when public land really isn't super bad. Like we always talk about public land being so hard, but that's because there's always so much pressure. This is the time of season where there's less pressure than any other time of the year. And so you have that advantage, so it's like it actually can work in your favor if you go out and try to work those deer a little bit. And yeah, you might have some other people hunting in there, but it's not going to be like it was in the rut and the opener or those nice weekends in October. And so just go out and experience it. Private land, public land, just go see if you can do it. I mean, what else you got to do? It's dark at freaking 5 o'clock now. Like, I mean, it sucks. We're locked into this horrible winter pattern. Just give it a shot. And, if for nothing else, just to like learn a little bit about yourself, like what can you tolerate? What can you figure out now? And what can you learn about the deer? And if you go put it together and you get one killed, that's pretty sweet. It's worth the effort, I think.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think you hit that. And I just wanted to add like to what you were saying about taking it serious. Think about all the things you think about in the early season with your access, the wind, all of those things, and pay attention to all that just like you would any other time of the year. And I think you can learn a lot, even if you're going out just to have fun and shoot a doe, like, still use that as a learning lesson.
Yeah. Big time, man. Just get out there.
Just get out there and hunt.
You're never going to regret it going. Just get in the woods.
And as you and I talked about, again, I think we talked about it on Wired to Hunt, but it was like, I also like hunting snowshoe hares, which is also the opening week of late season for us. So I'll probably be splitting time in between doing that, maybe some deer hunting in the evenings or something, and during the day going out and carrying a shotgun. And I tried hunting snowshoes with a bow for a while. My dad was doing it, and I wanted to do it, and I'm done with that. Same thing like with turkeys. I'm shooting them with a shotgun, and that's what they're meant to be shot with.
I will agree with you on the snowshoe hare thing. I've hunted rabbits and some other small game quite a bit with a bow, and it's a hell of a lot better with a gun.
So much better.
A hell of a lot better.
It's like, all right, I want this to be fun. Like I already, everything else that we do is already hard enough. Like let's help ourselves a little bit.
Yeah. I do still think there's a pretty compelling reason to hunt turkeys with a bow, but it's such a different experience than going out and shooting them in the face with a shotgun.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you there. So,
well, let me put it this way. So if you don't have a lot of room to roam, then running and gunning with a shotgun sucks, right?
True.
And I'll tell you what, man, I don't think you can learn how turkeys interact and speak and like spend their day really well until you sit in a freaking bow blind and you work those birds all day, dark to dark in one spot. Man, it's brutal for most people, but I feel like I learned what turkeys do from scouting and hunting them with a bow better than I ever did with a gun. And I killed a pile of birds with a gun, but when you're like, I'm stuck in this spot and I need those birds to get here and be 7 yards away from me, oh man, you learn a lot about how to call them and set up for them and stuff, but it is not for everyone.
Yeah. Okay.
It can be so miserable.
I will agree with you. I will agree with you on that. Like, I think that's something that my narrow mind of thinking about it wasn't making sense. And I've never hunted them from a blind, like on a field or whatever. I was like, with bow hunting turkeys here, I was trying to run and gun and doing it that way, and I was just so like hard. So frustrating. And I've shot a couple birds doing it that way, and I was just like, I don't know.
If you're gonna do that, just carry the 12 gauge.
Yeah. But I definitely recommend anyone that listened to this one go over listen to the one where Tony interviewed me, and we basically just had a conversation like this on Wired to Hunt, but a little bit more focused towards bucks, and then a lot of really good stuff about snowshoes and also pheasant hunting and how that can be used in winter scouting, all that stuff. I think this was kind of like one big complete conversation that was split into 2 separate episodes. So I think everyone should head over and listen to that. But
I do too.
Yeah,
I think everybody should.
help Tony keep his job. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, help the low guy on the totem pole at Meat Eater keep his job for 1 more year. Go give us a listen.
No, but thank you again for coming on, Tony. Is there anywhere that you want to point anybody else to as far as checking things out? Big
it's
social
just all
media
Meat
guy.
Eater, man.
Big social media guy.
Yeah, you can go follow me at Tony J. Peterson on Instagram. But no, everything's at Meat Eater. Everything that I create, the podcast, videos, all the articles, everything, they can find it.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, buddy, for coming on. We'll make sure the next time you come on isn't so spread out and thin. So.
All right, buddy. I appreciate it, man.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.